Hello, welcome to episode number 113 of the Comic Watcher Show. I'm your host, Matt Meyer. With me, as always, are Nicholas Osborne and Mighty Mike Eakins. Our guest this week is writer of Scout's Honor from AfterShock and the Kickstarter joint, The O.Z., David Pepose. David, welcome.
Hi, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be on the show.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're happy to have you, man. I gotta say, we all sat down and dug into Scout's Honor and dug into the OZ and totally dug it. So, yeah, that's the end of the interview. No,
I'm glad you guys liked it.
Absolutely.
That would have been really terrible if I walked into the interview like, we read your books, they suck. That would have been a real long podcast.
I just have to interject that, if you ever are on a podcast so that happens, you're under no obligation to stick around.
I was be like, oh, sorry, internet connection dropping. No, it just would have. No, please. I would have let that be a super awkward hour for the rest of it. So,
and as well, you should. Yeah.
But no, I'm so glad you guys dug the books, and I'm excited to talk about them.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just start out with Scout's Honor because that one just came out week before last. And for those who may not be familiar with it, what's the elevator pitch?
Sure. The quick pitch for Scout's Honor is a cult has risen from the ashes of a nuclear apocalypse, and their Bible is an old Boy Scout manual. And so our story follows Kit, a young initiate who really represents kind of the best and brightest of the Ranger Scouts of America as they fight to retake the irradiated Colorado Badlands. There's just one problem. This is a patriarchal, hyper-masculine survivalist cult that only allows men to serve. And so Kit has had to conceal her identity as a woman in order to pursue her calling as a Ranger Scout. Unfortunately, this true believer is going to make a pretty chilling discovery dating all the way back to the creation of the Ranger Scouts. And it's going to make her lose her religion as she embarks on a really dangerous quest for the truth. I've likened this book to Fallout meets Mulan, but with a little bit of The Handmaid's Tale, The Hunger Games, and Planet of the Apes thrown in for good measure. It's a surprisingly fun book for something set at the end of the world. But it's also one that I think is maybe the most spiritual thing I've ever written. So it contains multitudes.
It absolutely does. The world of Scout's Honor feels very real, very fleshed out and lived in. You don't always get that in the first issue, I mean, and it's the vagaries of writing,
Right.
There's a swing and a miss sometimes, and sometimes you stumble onto that comic and you have to be like, well, it gets really good at issue 3. That's when everything comes together. But Scout's Honor, you get 3-4 pages in, and you have a good beat on this world.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about just the backstory of Scout's Honor, because it's one of those things that's ingeniously simple.
It was a fun process kind of building a post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult. There's really no other way to describe it. And I appreciate you talking about the world building, because I think you were talking about the vagaries of writing, and I think that's a great way of describing it. I think certain concepts lend themselves to particular angles. Something like my first book, Spencer and Locke, just by the sheer title, that's a character piece. And so focusing on sort of the backstory of these hard-boiled detectives and how they became who they became, that's really like the meat of the story. And then there's sort of the detective noir plot that they find themselves going through. There's other things like my book Going to the Chapel, which is it's Die Hard at a wedding. And that the actual plot of that story is going to be the thing that really is the engine. You want to know what's a hostage situation at a wedding look like. In Scout's Honor, I think the world building is the thing that concept really lends itself well to. And so for me, I always tend to gravitate towards books that have a lot of imagery and iconography I can play with, whether it's playing off of Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes for Spencer and Locke, or the wedding imagery of going to the chapel, or L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz in the O.Z. Scouts Honor, obviously, I played off of the Boy Scouts, and sort of there's such a rich mythology and history to the organization, and I was able to kind of find the religion in all of it. Things like the merit badges, which in this world are sort of almost a form of communion. It's a coming of age. It's showing that you have mastered certain skills, and there's a military tactical element to that as well, because it's great to know what skills your brothers in arms have just by looking at them. Or things like the actual Boy Scout laws, which we've mutated into the 7 Scout laws, or even the founder of the Boy Scouts, which we've created an analog for, Dr. Jefferson Hancock, who's become kind of the prophet messiah figure of the Ranger Scouts. He's been deified. He's been long dead by the time that this story begins, but he sort of is another character into of himself that really looms large over the story as a whole.
Right.
As far as the backstory of Scouts Honor, it might be my most autobiographical book.
And that was actually my next question: is were you a Boy Scout?
No, my younger brothers were.
Okay.
And I think that outside looking in perspective it was sort of the initial kernel of the concept. For them, it's about spending time with your boys. It's about learning practical skills. It's about the camaraderie, and sometimes the rivalry of it all. Whereas on the outside looking in, you see the pageantry, and you see the costumes, and you see the oath, and you see the bylaws, and you don't have to squint too hard for it to look a little like a cult. But I think the thing that really kind of I drew from for fleshing out this story is obviously I did not grow up in the apocalypse or a cult, but I did grow up in a pretty conservative, both religiously and politically, Jewish household in Missouri. And it was one of those things that there were so many things that I believed, and then I left home and realized these core pillars weren't as steady as I thought. It didn't really reflect the way that the real world operated. And I remember how disorienting it was to have to kind of recalibrate my own internal compass while still kind of staying true to my own kind of spiritual and ethical values. It was tough. But I think that made me kind of have my own political and spiritual reawakening. And so much of that has kind of informed Kit's journey in this. There's sort of first that element of denial, and then sort of this feeling of rage, of betrayal. But then it's sort of, the 5 stages. You have to kind of figure out, how do you accept the world as it is? And what can you keep? What are the values that are positive that you can keep? And then the things that are negative, the things that have the shortcomings, the failings, what do you replace that with? Things like even the Catholic priest scandals. My partner was raised Catholic, and she's no longer a member of the church. And it was because of those scandals. She said, how can I be a member of this institution that has swept these things under the rug? And sort of taking these 2 stories and mashing them together, that's Kit's journey, is how do I stay true to myself and my values while navigating this human institution that's flawed and perhaps corrupt, and really kind of finding a way to stay true to yourself and still be the best version of yourself you can be.
Well, and I like that there, what you're saying, being the best version of yourself you can be, because I think all of us at some point when we're growing up, and you alluded to this when you talked about coming from a very conservative household, but we all have that moment where we look at the things that have surrounded us when we're growing up, and suddenly you just say, wait a minute, I think that's bullshit. And that's it happens to everyone at different ages, and some people it doesn't happen until they're well into adulthood.
Sure.
And it's all part of that journey of becoming who you are.
Yeah.
And it's such fertile storytelling ground.
Thank you. So much of living your authentic life deals with first kind of confronting the truth. And sometimes that's natural, and sometimes that's really hard to kind of come to grips with. a lot of Scouts Honor is about secrets and how oppressive they can be.
Sure.
Kit, for example, like I said, she's a woman who has had to navigate the Ranger Scout cult. And so she's got this armor on all the time where she can't let anything slip. She's supposed to fly under the radar, but she loves being a Ranger Scout, so she can't. But at the same time, she's got to constantly kind of watch her back and look over her shoulder to make sure that she doesn't let slip exactly who she is. With only some mild spoilers, we'll see later on in the series, her best friend Dez, he also has a secret that's really crucial to who he is. Because I thought, if this society would be hard for a woman to navigate, how hard would it be for somebody from the LGBTQ community? And so when you kind of strip him down, when you boil away the post-apocalyptic stuff and even the Boy Scout imagery, Dez he's the son of Scoutmaster Shepherd, the political and religious leader of this cult. And so really he's the closeted son of the pastor in a small conservative town. And how hard is it to kind of live your life that way? And how tragic is it that both Kit and Dez have these big secrets that are really cut to the heart of who they are as people. And they can't tell anybody. They don't even know each other's big secrets.
Right.
That's going to kind of put them on it's going to take their friendly rivalry and really curdle it in a big way. And it's going to put them in a collision course that I think is in a lot of ways the emotional backbone of this story. It's when I think we all are living in a culture that there's toxic masculinity in there. And you can see just, looking in the news, the rise of sort of evangelical megachurches and sort of the disdain for higher education and critical thinking, the fetishizing of military and survival preppers. This is our world, just sort of set a little bit a ways in the future.
Right. The best post-apocalyptic worlds are the ones that eerily resemble our own. There's like one minor difference that sets them apart.
It's one of those things, if you fit a certain mold, being in a society like the Ranger Scouts, it's natural, it's easy, it's you're on top. But what happens when you don't fit that mold? How do you navigate your life? And that's something that I think we really explore a lot in Scouts Honor, in addition to kind of the fun post-apocalyptic action and the sort of the off-kilter religious iconography that we've turned the Boy Scout imagery into.
Wow. So, speaking of people from the backwoods of Missouri, I'm going to let Mike jump in. I know he's got some questions too.
I lived there for 3 years. 3 years.
Nice.
You'll never hear the end of it.
I was a teenager. I had to move. My parents went, leave me alone. No, I got to ask about Kit. She has a certain vigor, she has a spark about her. She's so determined. She's such a strong character. We see her, as you touched on earlier, kind of like losing her religion in a sense, but the story does feel like a coming of age story. And she does battle with her needing to be a ranger, her needing to be a great ranger. Why is that important to Kit?
So we'll dive a little bit into that. Actually, we will see how Kit was first introduced to the Ranger Scouts. We'll actually see that in the beginning of issue 2.
Okay.
It's I have found that it's one thing to be born into a particular religion, and then you find though that the converts often be the ones who cling to it even more. This is sort of hard fought, hard earned.
Right.
But it's a lot of it is the Ranger Scouts in Kit's mind. They're the heroes. They're the ones that stand between civilization and oblivion. They're the ones that when raiders attack caravans and villages all around the Badlands, it's the Ranger Scouts that step in. It's the Ranger Scouts that protect. And so it's one of those things that Kit, at a young age, has seen the Ranger Scouts, and she believes in their mission, because she believes that even in the worst possible scenario, this post-apocalyptic world, she believes that there's a better world right around the corner, if only there are people who are willing to fight for it. And so she is willing to fight for it no matter what. And at the same time, she sort of sees it as, I know I'm not supposed to be doing this. This is the one thing that I'm sort of going to keep under the radar. I can be the best scout that I can be, even if I am a woman. And, unfortunately, you can only kind of stick your head in the sand for so long.
Sure.
Sometimes the truth can get a little ugly. And so Kit will really have to have a reckoning with sort of the ideals and her own mind's image of what the Ranger Scouts are and can be with what the Ranger Scouts have been for real in reality historically. And she's going to have to kind of figure out where she stands in the middle.
Awesome. Now, I got to ask one more question with Dez. With Dez and Kit, obviously you already touched on that, going forward. But with Dez, is this going to break it almost like a coming of age story for him? Because there's that one panel, I think it's right during the feast, right when they kill the Gamma Boar and everything.
Yeah.
Like you just see like this ultimate, just like disappointment on his face, and she's. Kit's like, oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. He was like, yeah, just whatever. Just leave me alone.
Yeah.
So it's like he has his own struggles. And as you pointed out earlier, we're going to see even more struggles. So is there going to be almost like a good story type deal with the plot line?
Yeah. I think Dez is absolutely a foil for Kit. Their journeys are pretty intertwined through much of this book. Their rivalry, I think, is it keeps our story from being a little too highfalutin. It's not just about sort of, the religion of it all and where do I stand spiritually? But, it's sort of what's the real world consequences for that? It's going to put Kit and Dez on opposite sides. Dez has been a really fun character to write. I mean, like I said, Kit is kind of the big picture, but Dez is sort of, how does the big picture affect your day to day? And I've always said he's the Loki to Kit's Thor.
Okay.
And so I see him as almost he's not a villain. His story's kind of tragic. I get exactly why he is the way he is, and there's an element of sadness no matter what. Whenever I've written him, and so he might be my favorite character in the book. He might even edge out Kit a little bit, just because I feel for the guy and his story is so tragic. And he just like Kit, Det is also going to have some big decisions that he's going to have to make that we'll see kind of play out over the course of the series.
Very cool.
Yeah. Let me just interject real quick. Gamma dogs. My hat is off to you. Or Gamma Boars, I mean. Absolutely. Well, I'm saying Gamma Dogs because the boar of the Gamma of it all made me think of the Gamma Dogs from the Bad Hulk movie.
Sure. I was just thinking, like, what's a creature out in the wild that's like that? Even if it wasn't irradiated, you probably wouldn't want to mess with it. And
boars.
Boars. 30 to 40 feral boars.
Yep.
And
they're radiated now and horrible.
They're radiated now. It's even worse. It's one of those things that's the tough thing for the Ranger Scouts is even though it's been a couple hundred years since the bombs have dropped, they still haven't really gotten beyond the hunter-gatherer kind of stage.
Right.
And some of that's environmental.
Stay that way because that means they stay firmly in control.
Yeah. Well, and it's some of it's environmental and some of it is, when all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so, this cult has been self-perpetuating in a way because of course a cult built on survival skills in the apocalypse is going to be very important. And, anybody who might dissent in that probably isn't going to live very long.
Right.
And so, it's, I think part of the thing that I liked so much about the Ranger Scout cult is I thought about Howard Zinn. He's a historian. He talked about how history is written by the victors. And, history is a game of telephone. It's sort of, we mythologize it generation to generation. And sometimes the mythology kind of bends in on itself. I mean, look, it wasn't until fairly recently that people started talking about Christopher Columbus and mentioning genocide. And so I thought, if history is a game of telephone, what happens if you just cut the line dead? It's a brand new dark ages. Human beings want continuity, and they will reach for it in any way possible. So thinking, what's the weirdest thing that civilization could start again? What's their weirdest thing that could be their Bible? And sort of that idea of, the Boy Scout manual, it lended itself to a lot of different imagery and a lot of just of fun angles to interpret. Like I said, I was raised Jewish, and I'm still a practicing Jew. My practicing, though, I think is very different than that of my parents, which is very different than that of their parents. Judaism as a religion is very much built on literary interpretation and critique. You can get 5 different rabbis looking at the same passage and give you 10 different interpretations, and we take all that apocryphal material and still put it in the margins. Going from sort of secular cultural Judaism to Reform to conservative to Orthodox to the ultra Hasidic community, there's a wide spectrum of practice and interpretation. And so finding the religion in the Ranger Scout cult was kind of one of the most fun elements for me. Things like we wrote in our first issue, we wrote back matter for the different Ranger Scout merit badges, which will be available and are available now at participating comic shops. But finding things like the Explosives merit badge, that's their creation myth. The world was born with an explosion. And yet at the same time, if you don't sort of know everything there is to know about a bomb, it could be the thing that consumes you next. And so, finding those different angles in the mix, it really kind of elevated the story, I think, in a big way for me, and sort of really fleshed out the world and sort of made it one that was interesting to explore and one worth fighting for.
Awesome.
I love that, really, because I kind of wanted to dive into a little bit more of the merit badges that we see, because we see Kid win a merit badge, and that's something that I thought was a really cool contrast, because you're so used to it being such like a glorious moment and being like, here's this awesome merit badge, you've worked so hard for it, and it totally twists from there. It does not end up how you feel like, and it serves as a catalyst for that big twist with Kid.
Yeah.
There's so much that you play into with the lore that you kind of bring into the story, as far as what we know about Scouts, and what we as readers bring into it in our own interpretations and expectations with this world. Like you said, it's a patriarchal world, and there's something that pretty quickly twists in it, and I feel like that's a perfect example of how you've used the lore to bring that twist into this apocalyptic world with the merit badges that are kind of crazy. There are some that you would sort of expect, I guess, like there's archery. And like a wilderness survival. And trying not to get on my own soapbox, but I'm from East Texas, and I come from a conservative family, was raised pretty conservative, was always at the Boy Scout camp doing forestry. So I'm pretty much in tune with what this vibe is. Yeah. And it does feel like it connects to that fetishization of not only survivalism and preppers, but the kind of the gun nuts of the world and stuff like that too, where you're tapping into a lot of that, and it puts a darker spin on it. Did you find yourself having troubles falling too deep into that darker spin while keeping a positive story for Kit?
Yeah, this is a great question. It's always something that I'm trying to feel out. It's so much of this is like my writing style in general is often about intuition. It's sort of I compare it to you're going into your bedroom and it's dark, or maybe you have a blindfold on. And on one side, you got a bunch of Legos, and the other side, you've got a bunch of clothes, and maybe in another corner, you've got glass. And you're just kind of having to tiptoe your way to try to crawl into your own bed without stepping on something horrible. It's about how to, taking it slow, but just how does it feel, and definitely I'm always kind of questioning how does this work tonally, and trying to keep my books in general from being too bleak. I think anybody who's read my bibliography, I usually work with pretty harsh, high concepts, but my work is always about the redemptive climb out. It's always about how do we get to a better place from here. It's I think sometimes dark toned concepts provide great contrast for that climb out. I think it was a weird book, I gotta say, to write, because so I pitched this well before the pandemic, well before anything going on with that. I think I pitched this to AfterShock. I think it was like August of 2019, thereabouts. But based on the way that the development process went and the contracts came in, I did not sign the paperwork until 2 weeks before lockdown. And so I wrote 80% of this book in lockdown. I remember thinking a lot about, are you sure you want to do this? Post-apocalyptic book, in the middle of COVID. But I'm glad I stuck to my guns, because I realized that the energy that I'm putting out into the world is not just, we're going to be in a harsh, dark place. But we can turn a corner. We can fight our way out of this. And, by the time that I had finished writing the book, I kind of felt that renewed sense of hope. And I think by the time that the last issue of this book hits stands, I think we'll have all turned a corner. So I think, there is, going back to Kit's sort of struggle, sometimes there is an element of faith you need, whether it's in a higher power or yourself or, your society or people doing the right thing. But you also have to be willing to fight for it. And that's something that I think everybody's been kind of doing their part. I think we've seen it in the last few months. I think we've seen it, especially this week. And I think as we continue to keep kind of taking these baby steps forward, we'll look back and we'll say, we did pull ourselves out of it. We will be canceling the apocalypse. So,
well, and what a good optimistic message right now. I mean, you just through sheer dumb luck, you seem to have tapped into the zeitgeist pretty well.
Sure. Yes.
But I do want
to luck.
But I do want to touch back on something a little darker that Nick was talking about, and that's cults. And this. There's like Dick was saying, there's a lot of fetishization going on of guns and masculinity and the prepper stuff. But I mean, it also has a little, the Moonies feel to it. What kind of research did you do into cults? Or did you just look at the news and extrapolate?
Some of it is looking at the news, and some of it is just kind of, like I said, kind of my own upbringing. I still have family who are back where I grew up, and hearing kind of the way that they see the world. Sometimes it's like, you sense the Kool-Aid has been drunk. Things like Fox News, for example. And sort of my own kind of run-ins with conservative news outlets. That in itself is sort of an alternate dimension with its own set of rules. I did do some research on Scientology. I kind of as kind of a big
little bit
my starting point for that.
Right.
Even kind of not just including the actual reading about Scientology and sort of the scandals that have gone on there, but even fiction like The Path. That show was a huge influence on Scout's Honor, where it's starring Aaron Paul, and basically it's about somebody who's in a Scientology style cult who tries to leave, and what happens to him and his family and sort of the guy who's running the cult as a result of all this. Like I said, some of it's also kind of was autobiographical in the fact that I was raised in a certain particular spectrum of Judaism. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of had to figure out, like, how am I going to own this on my own? If I want to own this on my own. My reasons, I think, are very different than that of my parents. For me, it's about connecting with the people who've come before and honoring the people who've died or the people who have not been able to, for whatever reason, practice. It's also kind of, I say it's my way of throwing a penny in the well of the universe. It's a way of adding just a little bit of meaning to a world that often doesn't have it. But the thing that I found particularly interesting looking at both religion in general and cults in particular is it can provide a lot of direction for people. Sometimes it can be kind of skewed and turned into something really sinister, but sometimes religion or spirituality, however you want to frame it, that can be the thing that gets you over the finish line when you got nothing else left in the tank. But at the same time, you can pick up your nearest history book and see all sorts of atrocities done in the name of religion,
Right.
Both on sort of the grand macro scale, but even just kind of to each other. The priest abuse scandals, the cult that Allison Mack was a part of. Seeing what people have done to science, inside of Scientology, and then seeing the backlash from these institutions and kind of the extraordinary lengths they'll go to kind of stamp out any dissent. Because of course, when those dominoes start to fall, it can eat a cult alive from the inside.
Sure.
And so, yeah, a lot of those things kind of came together in just sort of this feeling of like, oh man, like this sort of your world has been knocked off its axis. And that's the thing I really liked about Kit as a character in general is most of my characters have kind of had trauma in their past and they've been kind of marinating in it. And it kind of, their stories become, can they step up from that trauma long enough to get the job done or save the day or survive the night? Kit's pretty well adjusted, all things considered.
For now.
For now, we get to see her trauma play out in real time.
Right.
And so that's kind of the fun of this story is sort of, she's got to kind of get back on her feet immediately and figure out like, oh man, what the hell am I going to do?
Right.
And sort of seeing her try to figure all this stuff out on the fly. It's been a fun way to put it together, a story for sure.
So, you're talking about religion and spirituality, and I feel like, there's a wealth of difference between the two.
Sure.
Like spirituality is personal. It's about a personal connection. It's about ideas and hopes and aspirations, perhaps. Yeah. And, then you get to religion, and religion is more about a belief structure and rules and this and that. And I feel like Kit is at that point where she's realizing that these things are different. And now it's time, not only because she's discovered, and I don't want to spoil the end of the book, but discovered what she's discovered, but also just the fact that she's devoted herself to being something that she could never truly be.
Yeah,
by the dictates of the Ranger Scouts.
It's a great way that you described it. I might steal that for future interviews. So
you should totally quote us.
Because I think maybe the way that I would phrase it is religion is the instruction manual. Mm-hmm. Spirituality is you deciding how you're going to build it.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy.
And I think you're right in that Kit is kind of realizing like there's so much, it's easy to kind of parrot the scripture or the scripture without even really doing too deep of a dive into what it means. Right. There's something very different when you have to actually sort of independently be like, well, what does this mean to me? And figuring out. And I like how you said, based on the scripture, Kit will never be a true Ranger Scout. But I think the text of the book will wind up challenging that. Is that Kit will, I think, find out that she will rediscover maybe she's a Ranger Scout in all the ways that count. It's something. It's funny that I say to my partner. Like I said, she was raised Catholic, but she practices now, because she knows Judaism is an important thing to me, and I am always struck by the way that just kind of by osmosis, just by sheer virtue of knowing me and knowing my family, that I often say, she is Jewish in all the ways that truly matter, and I feel like being able to kind of own your own spiritual path is something that's so important. And it's something that Most people do. The ones that don't, it's kind of tragic, you know, like, but I think for most people, that is part of the coming of age process, is figuring out what do you believe and how are you going to live your life. But it's something that's a journey that sometimes can take your whole life. Living authentically is not something that is always easy. Who you are and what society demands or expects out of you can be diametrically opposed sometimes. But yeah, I love the way that you described that, because yeah, it's a matter of her really kind of having to figure out the truth, but also having to really put her money where her mouth is.
Yeah.
You know, religion, or I shouldn't even say religion. Your values are easy when things are easy. Your values only matter when your back's against the wall. And so, you know, Kit is going to really kind of find herself having to sort of really kind of fight for what she believes in and figure it out on the fly without having sort of that knowledge that she has everybody at her back. She's kind of has to do this journey mostly alone. And I think that sort of grit and determination to sort of pull yourself across the finish line, no matter how much it hurts. That's something that makes Kit, I think, a really fun character to write.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, best of luck to her. How many issues is
Five.
Five? Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify.
So issue 3 is currently available for pre-order. The code for that is Jan for January 211049.
This guy.
Yeah.
That was like the best bit of self-promotion we've ever had on the show.
Write that down.
Tell your local comic shop, add all 5 issues to my pull list. I think we'll have the trade out. I believe it's August or September.
That's awesome. AfterShock is doing so many cool things right now.
They've been a really fun publisher to work with.
Yeah.
For me, it's been almost kind of coming full circle with my career. One of my editors, Mike Martz, I've known since I was in college. I interned for him when I was an intern at DC Comics, and he was the editor of Batman line.
Yeah.
And so that has sort of really kind of been the X factor that's pushed me a little harder with this book, is that Mike sat me down at an important crossroads in my career. I interned during Batman RIP and Final Crisis and Green Lantern Secret Origin, but it was also during the recession. There were no jobs. And I remember being terrified that my journey into comics was over almost as soon as it had begun. And Mike sat me down and said, nobody walks into the Yankees. And by that, he meant, people start on the farm teams and they kind of work in the mid-tier teams, and then they get bigger and bigger teams, and then they can walk onto the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Cardinals or whatever you want however you want the analogy to go. And it made me realize that not only was this my first step of my journey, not the last, but it made me open my horizons for everything that comics could offer, not just DC and not just superheroes. I think a trap that a lot of aspiring pros get into is they don't say, I want to make a living writing comics. They say, I want to write Spider-Man or Batman or whatever character you want to throw out there. And I think that's there are more professional NBA players than there are Spider-Man writers. And so it's one of those things, people set themselves up for failure. But on top of that, even if you did manage to grab the brass ring for a minute, that becomes a gig with a shelf life. Even somebody like Dan Slott wrote Spider-Man for a decade. You can't write Spider-Man forever. And so I find that Mike really kind of helped me broaden my dreams a little bit and made me realize that there are so many different types of storytelling that in comics that I could tackle, and so many different angles that I could approach. And so, working with Mike and our lead editor, Christina Harrington, it's my first time working with editors, and it was in certain ways a really fun learning curve. But I feel so grateful for the opportunity and for working with a team like artist Luca Casalanguida, colorist Matt Milla, letterer Carlos Manguel, our amazing cover artist Andy Clark, and colorist Jose Villarrubia. It's just been a really amazing, incredible experience, and I'm hoping this will be the first of many projects with AfterShock.
Nice. I love that. And while we're on the theme of kind of expanding your horizons and seeing what all comics has to offer, not only do you have this super cool book at AfterShock, there's a pretty exciting Kickstarter that I backed on retweets alone.
Yes.
I saw so many creators I follow retweet the OZ campaign from Kickstarter. I was like, what am I missing out on here? I've got to just, like, I opened it up. I saw the first page of it. I said, I'm in. I backed it. And it was amazing. So tell us a little bit about that project, and let's change gears to the OZ a bit.
The OZ is a really special book for me. When I came out with my breakout book, Spencer and Locke, I didn't know if I was going to write any more books. I was kind of like, let's see if people hate this thing. Thankfully, they didn't. People really liked that book. And so I came up with 3 ideas after Spencer and Locke. And one of them was Spencer and Locke 2, our sequel. The second was Going to the Chapel. And the third was the OZ. So this book has been in the works for years at this point. And the book is what if the Hurt Locker took place in The Wizard of Oz? It's the story of Dorothy Gale's granddaughter, who's a disillusioned Iraq war veteran who finds herself stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. And as we find out, her grandmother killing 2 wicked witches and convincing the Wizard of Oz to leave in like a week and then splitting has caused a power vacuum that has turned Oz into something not unlike Baghdad. So our new Dorothy is going to have to navigate these factions led by her grandmother's former friends if she hopes to survive the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ. I love that book. It's the book that, there's been a lot of stops and starts involved in the making of this book. I pitched it initially to a well-known publisher who was very excited about the book, and we ran it all the way up the flagpole. And kind of at the 11th hour, there was another fantasy book that had been pitched by a bigger writer at the same time, and so the town was not big enough for the 2 of us. So what happened was the editor that I spoke with, he didn't have to do this, but he said, I don't want you to give up on this book. And that was really the vote of confidence I needed to really take matters into my own hands. So I wound up collaborating with artist Ruben Rojas, colorist Whitney Kogar, letterer DC Hopkins. And we started slowly but surely putting together a book. I saw our initial pitch pages, and they were so just amazingly good that I said, guys, come hell or high water, I will make this book happen. This book will exist. Keep going. I will pay you out of pocket if I must. So I did. We were getting the book together. We had 2 issues in the can. Meanwhile, I had a lot of friends who told me that Kickstarter was the way to go. Friends like Charlie Stickney from White Ash, Rylan Grant from The Jump and the Peacekeepers, Pat Shan from Destiny New York. They all said, this is a great place to kind of reach out to a different demographic than the traditional Wednesday warriors that are hitting their comic shops every week. And it all kind of came to a head last year. Diamond had their temporary shutdown. A lot of publishers who had expressed interest in the OZ, suddenly their acquisitions pipeline shrank. And I realized I could solve one problem with another. I could give the OZ a home and introduce myself to the Kickstarter community with my absolute A game. And the OZ came out through there. I was stunned at the reaction to that book. We wound up making over $50,000 on our first issue. It was incredible. I still can't believe it. And I'm so grateful. We're so excited to be gearing up for part 2 that'll be coming out hopefully soon, sooner rather than later. The book is already written, so it's just in the process of getting drawn. And it's just a fun kind of remix that takes my roots from Spencer and Locke and really expands the scale of it all in a way that still, I think, speaks very clearly to my own sensibilities as a creator.
Well, I mean, talking about world building, you're, instead of getting to build a world, you're kind of getting to find natural extrapolations on a world that's already been built.
Yeah.
So how has that creative process been for you, like finding those natural extensions as compared to, say, Scouts Honor, where you're more or less building everything from scratch?
Sure. It's a great question. I think it speaks to my background as a journalist. I got my start after I was at DC, I worked as a newspaper reporter. And I also moonlit at Newsarama as the reviews editor for over a decade. And so the idea of, of sort of remembering is easier than inventing out of whole cloth. And so finding different pieces and kind of remixing them together, it's a fun way to take people's expectations and turn them on their heads. It's my way of sort of having my cake and eating it too, as far as the creator owned versus licensed book divide. Yes, in a way it is sort of a licensed book in that I get to play with continuity and I get to invert tropes that people already know about through cultural osmosis. But it's creator owned in the sense that, well, I get to take like a brand new genre twist on what is usually seen as a fairly tame mythology. I'm able to really go like Full Metal Jacket on it. And so, seeing the way that artist Ruben Rojas has, he and I have been able to reimagine these characters and redesign them in really cool and interesting ways. It's made the process of this book so fun. It's one that I'm so glad that people have really responded to.
Absolutely. I seriously responded to it. That's a nice way to put it, because I fell in love with the book. I mean, pretty quickly. I'm a big Mignola fan, and the way he uses folklore and mythology and kind of does that natural extension on it and fits it within the Hellboy world and stuff like that. And I feel like this is sort of along those lines where you're taking mythology that we all love, and we all have some familiarity with it, like to some degree. So you don't need to know everything about like the Wonderful Wizard of Oz to pick up this book and enjoy it. There's a passing, glancing familiarity with these books, and you're like, okay, I get this.
Yes, that dates all the way back to my first book, Spencer and Locke. Which the quick pitch for that is, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City? And I think that stems from, I look at comics with an existential question. It's, how do we get new readers to the table? Like, I don't want to preach to the choir. I want converts. And so for Spencer and Locke, it was, even if you're not reading what's new in Spider-Man, most people past a certain age, they've heard of Calvin and Hobbes. You show up a photo on your phone and they get it. Same thing for the Wizard of Oz. You know it through cultural osmosis. Even if you don't know anything about the books, you know who Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Lion are. And that's actually that plays really nicely for me, because then it's like I can take a lot of different liberties, but those archetypes are so strong that it still feels organic. It still gives me a lot of fun thematic and emotional stuff to play with.
I got to ask really quick. People in, whether it's books or movies, whatever, everyone, especially in Hollywood, the retelling or the re-drumming up of stories and stuff. And with this, it's so different because, it's the Wizard of Oz. Yes, all the ingredients are there, the recipe's there, but you manage to add your own to where Dorothy has a separate story with heavy subjects like PTSD, suicide. She's a veteran, not to mention the Scarecrow. So you're taking this beloved story that I'm sure everybody in the universe grew up watching. But why the Wizard of Oz? What drew you to the Wizard of Oz to really just kind of, like I said, just take it and go, yes, like you said, everyone knows Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Wicked Witch. What was it about the Wizard of Oz that were like, what, this thing needs to get proposed?
Yeah.
And, and that's not copyrighted, Dave. So you take that with you. Put that out.
I'm gonna take that. I mean, that is technically my Twitter handle. So, but I'll run with it. So it's a great question. And so for me, Matt said earlier that I, through sheer dumb luck, I fell into my concept for Scout's Honor, and he's so right. And that's exactly what happens with all of my concepts. So it's not so much, it's never me saying I need to do a story about the Wizard of Oz. It's more of, I want to do this sort of story, and then, the Wizard of Oz fits that really well. And I guess I can run with it. That happened with Spencer and Locke, of sort of figuring out, for me, especially working with like dark remixes of stuff, it's very easy to just be gratuitous, but I find that shock value doesn't get you very far. That'll get your foot in the door for one issue, not, a long-term emotional connection with your reader. I want that engagement long-term. And so I'm often kind of thinking like, okay, I have an idea for a type of story. What could click with that? And so after I'd written Spencer and Locke and done my riff on Calvin and Hobbes, I said, I'd love to do something in a bigger genre outside of crime. And so sci-fi and fantasy really popped up at me. And sci-fi is tough though. Sci-fi, you got to like build it in like actual like some sort of laws of physics. Whereas fantasy, you can play with the metaphor. Characterization turns into certain power sets and themes. And so I thought, I wrote down just some actual fantasy inspirations, things like Lord of the Rings, Piers Anthony, Incarnations of Immortality, Harry Potter, and I wrote down The Wizard of Oz. And I remember my cursor flashing on the word Oz. And I was like, that word is so short, but so iconic. What if that was an abbreviation for something? And I thought OZ, I thought occupied zone. And I said, oh, that's it. That's it. And it's not just a fantasy book, it's a war book.
Right.
And realizing that fits in nicely with the established continuity of The Wizard of Oz. I grew up during the invasion of Iraq. That was when I was in high school. And so like, I know that like, if you knock out a dictator and then don't have like a very, very, very specific plan in play, and even sometimes if you do have a plan in play, things can go south real fast. It would not be the happy ending that we've been like raised to believe.
Right.
And the idea of like, oh yeah, like taking a war bent on that, recasting Dorothy as a soldier, having the Tin Man being like this hulking behemoth that's been blown up and rebuilt so many times. That I was like, that sounds metal as hell. That sounds awesome. And so, yeah, and I think it plays to a lot of the themes that I like to explore, particularly as far as past trauma. And, can we transcend that? Or are our scars going to be the things that define us and limit us in certain ways? So, yeah, it also, I had read Wizard of Oz in college. I actually wrote a term paper for adolescent literature about how L. Frank Baum had sort of created a proto-Marvel universe because he had written dozens of Wizard of Oz books, and he was building continuity upon continuity upon continuity decades before Stan and Jack ever showed up. And so I thought it was a nice way of kind of going back to my roots a bit, is knowing that like, yeah, there's the core quartet that everybody knows just from the Judy Garland film, but maybe you've seen Return to Oz and sort of seen like that kind of creepy.
I still see Return of Oz in my nightmares. Thank you.
And there's certainly a bit of that in there, but even just kind of the deeper mythology that has sort of been stretched out over the course of so many books. It's a nice way of threading the needle, of saying, okay, what can I tell that I know somebody's grandma would understand,
right?
Versus like let how many Easter eggs can I throw in there for like the diehard Oz fans? I've already said, because people like ask me all the time, they're like, oh, they're going to be wheelies in this book, and I'm like, I think that's a strong possibility. Or people saying, what about Ozma, for example? And I'm like, if we do a sequel, yes, because that's somebody I have in my back pocket.
Yeah,
because she would definitely have some very strong opinions about Dorothy and her crew. But yeah, it's been a fun way of kind of remixing a classic in a way that honors the past but still feels new.
Yeah, absolutely. And
trying to do work.
I will definitely say that the balance of kind of seeing Dorothy in her in her army status, and then kind of foreshadowing to where she at now. There's that great balance where it didn't feel so, like, I want to say like fake, but it was just like it was authentic feeling to it, because you're like, you feel her plight. And then not only do you feel her plight because she's a veteran and she went through pretty much hell and back, but now you feel for, because, her grandmother's stories are true. Like, all this stuff is true. So add on top of everything that she's going through, and you really get a feel for it. It's great.
Thank you. I'm always kind of thinking, look, there's a lot of comics out there. You guys know this firsthand. And there's a lot of things competing for people's eyeballs and attention and their wallets. And so the question I'm always asking myself is, what do I need to do to make a stranger give a damn? And often that's in the characterization as well as the high concept. I find that a misconception that a character has either about themselves or the world around them, and watching them have to kind of come to grips with, usually it's them being super hard on themselves, and sort of realizing they don't have to do that anymore. I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. I think we're all our own worst critics. And so, so thank you for saying that. It's something I was thinking a lot about because Dorothy's a badass. I love writing her.
Definitely.
She's a boss, and just seeing the way that she interacts with the Tin Soldier, and as you'll see other characters in the Oz series, it's been one of the biggest honors of my career to work in that book, and I'm so thrilled.
That's awesome.
Can't wait for it to come back.
You said that issue 2 is currently being drawn.
Yes.
For if you want to put a little hype on it, when do you think perhaps that might start hitting Kickstarter?
I'm talking with artist Ruben Rojas about it now. I'm hoping March or April.
Okay.
So
awesome.
Like definitely in the first half of 2021. Like I said, it's written. The book, I actually finished writing it during lockdown. So it is done. I'm really thrilled with how the story turned out. I think we're gonna stick the landing in a big way. And so it's just, things have been so crazy in the last year. Ruben himself has had to kind of roll with a few COVID-related punches. So he is hard at work though. And honestly, if seeing his pages from that first issue, it's worth the wait. He is the next. He's like Sean Murphy by way of Dan Mora.
I can see that.
He is a superstar in the making, and so so every week I check in and I'm like, hey buddy, how are we doing? And he'll show me the pages that he's working on this week. So slowly but surely he's chiseling his way through. It's looking terrific. I think we'll probably have half of it done relatively soon. I'm hoping probably March or April. We'll see that. But I will be shouting it from the rooftops when the O.Z. comes back, because that book is so special to me. It's a book that a lot of people have, all of my books have come with some degree of rejection. And I find that spite is my best rocket fuel as a creator. I like when I feel strongly about something, somebody telling me no is the thing that crystallizes it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to get this book made. And seeing that, we had over 1,250 people respond to that just for our first issue. I'm so thrilled to see where I think the sky's the limit for the O.Z. And I can't wait for readers to see what we've got in store next.
I mean, absolutely. It's just a fantastic book. That and Scouts Honor alike. They're so unique, and they stand out so well. So I mean, really, our collective hats are off to you, David, for just the sheer give a damn you put into it, so to speak, crafting these worlds and giving us characters that we can care about. Before we wrap things up, I think my last question is, beyond more O.Z., beyond wrapping up Scouts Honor, what are you looking forward to in the future? What's coming down the pipe?
Yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff. I'm working on Spencer and Locke Volume 3. It's been long in the works. Garfield themed serial killer is picking off the Peanuts gang, and Spencer and Locke are caught in the middle, having to try to figure out who done it. It's been a long time coming. There's a lot of research involved, and unlike Spencer and Locke 2, I've written 6 books in between since then. So it's just taken a little while. I have actually a reunion with my Spencer and Locke co-creator George Santiago Jr. in the pages of the Big Hype anthology that'll be hitting Kickstarter next month. We have a full-length superhero one-shot called Roxy Rewind. It's our love letter to classic Spider-Man, but told and remixed through the lens of time travel stories like Life is Strange and Back to the Future. And then, I'm working on a collection of different, or collection's the wrong word, a number of different horror-related stories right now. I dipped my toe into horror last year at the Nightmare Theater Horror Anthology and got a little bit of a taste for it. Yeah, I'm working on 3 different new horror stories coming over right now, and yeah, I'm excited to be able to lift the curtain on that.
Awesome. I'm so thrilled. I genuinely can't wait to see what else comes from you. We had a real quick question that just popped in from Mitch Gurowitz, who wants to know: are there any more AfterShock books in the works?
Fingers crossed. We're working on it. There's actually a couple pitches in their hands right now. So fingers crossed, one of these will be the right fit. If not, we'll find one that'll be the right fit. Scouts Honor was the 3rd time I pitched AfterShock, so sometimes it's a matter of finding the right pitch that'll fit with the publishers as well. But I've so enjoyed working with AfterShock and working with Christina and Mike and their president Lee Kramer and Steve Rotterdam, their head of marketing. I've been thrilled to work with them, and I don't think this will be the last that they see of me.
There you go.
That's awesome.
You heard it here first. Comics writer is writing more stuff. As comic journalists ourselves, your arc, your professional career is really pretty cool because it gives us hope. And because all comics journalists are just failed comics writers.
Oh no,
aspiring comics writers. And I really to hear your story and see you succeeding at your dream truly is awesome.
Thank you.
All jokes aside,
I consider myself lucky.
Yeah, really, and I mean, just keep doing what you're doing, man.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David Pepose, for hanging out with us. And next week, we'll see everybody again. We've got Chip Zdarsky and Jason Liu dropping in to talk about new comical books from them. So until next time, support your local comic store, support a Kickstarter, read something, and be good to each other. Peace.